Hey, everybody, it's PD Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down show. Working on getting everything set up here. I've got Trent in the green room in the background, working on trying to get his dad, Arch Gibson, the author, in. Arch is so Western that he's like, hey, I'm not sure which browser to use. And so right now we're working on getting him the right browser and everything else. If you're interested in Arch's work, you can go to that link right there, Modern West Fiction. And Arch is in the vein of someone like, well, we've had Craig Johnson on the show, right? And Craig Johnson is the guy who created the universe of Longmire. So if you've watched Longmire on Netflix or you've read Craig's books, this is sort of in the same vein, same kind of setting, and inspired by that. So there's a lot of big Western landscapes. There's, tough hombres. There's Native Americans in these kind of stories. And so I think you guys will enjoy once we get Arch in the studio here. We're working on that right now while we are talking about it. Hey, by the way, you can buy anything from the Break It Down store. We've got a lot of shirts. I'm going to start adding in, coffee mugs, stuff like that. If you want to do something simple, maybe even some bumper stickers, grocery bags, that kind of stuff. I'll be adding some of that stuff over time. It's a great way to support the show. Great way to, put something together to say, hey, I love what Pete is doing. If you also want to support the show, another way to do that is there's a PayPal link at breakitdownshow.com. It's one of the first things you see when you go to the page. It's also scrolling across on the page. There you can click on the PayPal link and put a little bit of money in each month. That is a great way to support the show. That money goes to me. I take that and I buy new equipment. I just bought a new camera the other day. You can't see it. It's just off the side here. But that stuff, tanks full of gas, marketing, so I could buy ads, that kind of thing. These are the things that help the show stay alive and grow. And that is always appreciated when you do that. So go to breakitdownshow.com and click on that or the Amazon link. Shoot, that's super easy. Click on the Amazon link and buy whatever you're going to buy from Amazon by using that link. That would be an enormous help as well. The show is alive and well, doing well. We have so many incredible guests coming up. I'm not sure exactly the date yet, and I think I can announce this officially now without getting myself in trouble. But coming up soon is Bruce Dickinson, the guy who fronts Iron Maiden. That guy. The guy's like singing "Number of the Beast." That guy is going to be on the show soon. I'm going to go see he's doing like a one-man show right now. The band will come back in the summer, but right now he's doing a one-man show and he's going to be writing some material. So I'm going to get to see him live in his one-man spoken word musical type thing he's doing, and then also record with him probably end of next month. So about this time next month, we'll have an idea of when that's going to happen. Could happen in April. Just kind of depends on timing. He's going to be in a creative space. We'll have time, but it's a matter of figuring out when that is going to be. So hang with the show for that. I mean, think about that. How incredible that is. We've had some incredible musical guests on the show. If you guys don't know this, our musical guests have sold, this is without Bruce, 1.7 billion records. 1.7 billion records. It shocks me when I say it out loud. I think, no, that can't be right. But it is true. Guys like Dave Auday, who have had 30 plus number one hits on the he's on the dance mix charts. He works with Lady Gaga. He's been on the show a couple of times. It's incredible. So we'll have Bruce on the show soon. We just earlier today had David Baker, which is a real fun show. David Baker is a guy that's been talking and thinking and helping businesses and writing about it for 30 years, and another incredible guy in his own part of the industry who's equally as successful as someone like Bruce. We had all kinds of things. If you're new to the show, hey, welcome. Check us out. It's always great when you subscribe. Prefer if you watch it on YouTube, and if you watch somewhere else, that's fine too. But the main place is YouTube. If you listen on the podcast side, I got to be honest, you're going to be behind a little bit because I am never going to get caught up on the podcast. There are so many shows in the queue for the podcast side that we can go several months without even doing a new show, and we will still be ahead of the podcast because the focus is the YouTube side of it. So if you guys are wanting to be in the spot to best support us, YouTube, the PayPal link, and then talk to me, peter@breakitdownshow.com. Glad to interact, glad to help you with your podcast if you need some advice on how to do that. I'm going to check in here with Trent real quick while he works on these things and see how close we are to getting Arch in studio. So let me grab Trent here real quick. Trent, how close are we to getting Arch in the studio? Are you guys making progress? 2 minutes. Okay, all right, great. We'll bring him back in the studio here in a second. So a lot of you read books. I know I do. I just recently read a book and had okay, so let me back up. Benjamin Barton was on the show the other day. I can put his link in the show, but basically he wrote a history of and kind of bioed what a Supreme Court justice looks like. His book isn't out yet. It's called Credentialed Court, and he was on the show the other day. And in Credentialed Court, he talks about how in the previous days, the court was filled with people who were exceptional, but they were not specifically judges and lawyers. And so a lot of the early judges had to go ride circuit. That means they had to get in canoes and townhouses and stay in all these different places to get to parts of Georgia and the Carolinas in early colonial United States and then early United States time. So these guys would go around and travel, and they were incredible people. Some of them were secretaries of state, some of them were important businessmen, some of them were all of these things at once. And then in Credential Court, you start to realize that we've gotten away from that model. And though politically a lot of our justices may be different, left or right or whatever, the type of people we pick are typically graduated from Yale or Harvard for the most part. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, they come from a lot of money, and they're not exactly representative of all of us. So I'll put a link for that in the show right now while we're talking. And the thing is in Benjamin's book, and he does a great job, but the book's really interesting. In his book, he talks about some of the other books he used for references, and one of those books was from another author who writes about the Supreme Court, and we're going to hopefully have him on the show soon too. So we'll see what happens. Let me grab Benjamin's link here. It's such an interesting, not a lot of writing publicly in big like bestseller fashion on this topic. So here's Benjamin Barton, Ben Barton, Credentialed Court. Second to do these things when I'm doing everything all at once. Credentialed Court, bam, YouTube. Okay, so you could always just go to youtube.com/PJ Turner, and you can get these things. Yeah, the sun is not cooperating today. Here we go. Here's the link. That's where you go to watch Credentialed Court with Benjamin Barton. Anyhow, the book that I'm referencing now is called Scorpions. I got it here on my trusty iPhone on Audible. And it's really it's remarkable. It talks about the Supreme Court justices that came into being during the reign of FDR. Oh, look at this. Looks like Skip is just about ready to go. Arch is almost ready. Okay, so in Scorpions, it's written by Noah Feldman, and hopefully I'll have Noah Feldman on with Benjamin Barton as a guest. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to see if I can bring in. Okay, I'm going to try to bring in Arch here.
You're in the show.
You're in the show.
You're in the show. You're in the
All
show.
right. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you, Arch?
Oh, I'm fine after that little ordeal. Thanks to Tag. He helped us through it.
That's right. That's right. And we have Tag here as well. There's different names in this family. You got
I'll
Tag.
try to stick with the given name, and that'll make it easier on you, maybe.
Yeah. Well, Trent is a good dude. Trent's been on the show before. Trent is part of a documentary that's coming up, and we had them talk about that. And I'll put the link for that episode in here while we're chatting. But hey, Arch, welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the hour or so.
Yeah.
Whatever's left of it.
Well, we got plenty of time. No big deal. We're not in a big hurry here because the main thing is that we got you on the show to talk about it. Do me this favor. Say, this is Arch Gibson, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
This is Arch Gibson, and I'm watching the Break It Down show.
That's right. And you are an author. What did you do before you started writing?
I wrote. I spent most of my professional career writing in one form or another. After graduation from college, during which I wrote a lot, I guess you could say I joined my father in newspaper work. He was editor of the Trinidad Chronicle News in Trinidad, Colorado, and I went there as a young reporter. From there, I moved on down to Roswell, New Mexico as a reporter photographer for the Roswell Daily Record. This is back in the post moon guys rigmarole that was going around Roswell. And as soon as I arrived and got acquainted with the sheriff, he told me, just I ask one favor: don't ask me about any moon men or little green men or anything like that. Okay.
Good enough
So
for me.
anyway, from there, I tried to catch up with my brothers who were in the Navy at the time. This is during Vietnam. The Navy rejected me, not because I was a writer, but I had a little problem with a piece of metal in my knee. So I went back to Colorado and worked in a lumber mill with my father-in-law for a short period of time. And eventually got on at the Lamar Tri-State Daily News in Lamar, Colorado as the city editor, and was there a few years and moved to Okmulgee, Oklahoma as the executive editor, and the Lawton Constitution, Lawton, Oklahoma, where I met an awful lot of people that would figure in some of my first novels, and since then, Native Americans, Comanche, Kiowa, Apache. Had a mid-career course change in 1987. I went to work in the defense industry as a writer for then a small aircraft maintenance operation based in Fort Worth, and went to work with former newsman Nick Stewart there. Stayed in that business for about 26 years. Started my first novel during that interlude, and it only took 37 years to bring it to production.
You got a good pace.
Okay. So anyway, that's what I did before. Really retired from that work and that kind of writing in 2015.
Okay.
And we published the first novel, Crossing the Red, in 2016. And the other four novels followed over the next 4 to 5 years until just this last year we published the fifth novel, Wasape, Life of a Comanche Warrior. So that's a little bit about the background. The biggest adjustment that I had to make during that period of time, and I visited with Tag or Trent about this before, was learning not to be a reporter that has to make a complete sentence out of everything you write. And the pyramid style, inverted pyramid style of writing is also much different in fiction. Some minor adjustments like that. Yeah, it only took me 37 years to figure it all out.
All right. Well, I've got some questions, but I want to ask Trent a question. Your dad's always been a writer, but taking on fiction, this a total pivot from where he's been his entire life, and then you get sucked into this thing too. What's your perspective on your dad's adventure and now many books written? Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
You got me now? Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Gotcha.
an interesting question, Pete, because personally, I'm not a fan of fiction books. I've read a few in my time, but if I have a choice, I'll usually pick up a historical piece rather than fiction. So it's actually been a breath of fresh air to adjust to that genre, and kind of like my dad had a paradigm shift to undergo in transitioning from how a reporter writes to how an author writes. I, with most of my writing background as a Marine, in writing dry, deliberate, technical pieces, I had to make an adjustment in my expectations about what it's like to read someone else's writing, and certainly a work of fiction.
I've got one comment about that.
Uh-uh.
This is the point at which I'll explain how he took to writing with me aptly. He was skilled at killing people, and we were working on uh, the book that followed the first novel, in which there was a lot of death and destruction, and he fit right in. It took a little adjustment to understand that he wasn't allowed to kill everyone that I had left still alive when I turned the file over to him. And I found that out by accident when I was reviewing some of his material, and I discovered that he had eliminated two of my main characters a little prematurely. And so, yeah, he sort of inquired after that about whether I had any long-term intent on some of these other characters that were in the novel. But once we worked out a few little technical details like that, we were fine. Point being there, my concern was that I already had the two characters that he killed. They were brothers, by the way, Comanche brothers. I had them in what turned out to be the second book, and it had not yet been published. So I couldn't, kill them off like that. Not yet.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got that all straightened out, and sometimes you can get ahead of yourself when you're writing, and you have these ideas, and so you start work on the next novel, whereas you're not quite finished with the current novel. Can cause some problems if you're writing sequentially and using the same characters over and over again.
So I want to ask Trent. I want to bring Trent back up front. Trent, when you're writing, I mean, I've written military things, I've written academic articles, and no passive voice, everything, no adverbs, all these wasted words. But you also have to spend time in fiction. And like you, I'm like, I don't read easy books. I don't read any fiction. But now I've kind of softened up now that I'm not in the business of war as much anymore. But the lightening up, the more time spent explaining how things smell or feel. I promise, as a Marine commander or as someone's staff member, you'd like, what emotion were you feeling then in the writing? As you put forward a PowerPoint thing or write a op order, you're not talking about how things smell, how things feel, how things look. You're much more direct, and the words are precious.
Yeah, there's certainly a difference between the two. Because one has a direct impact on lives, and whether you get it right or not is going to depend on whether someone gets a fucking phone call. But then in working in this realm of fiction, you also have to, or at least I felt compelled to portray things as realistically as possible, because in rendering those actions into words, they become alive, and we're all a product of our experience, and so I think it's natural for you to fall back on things that you've known, things you've experienced, and so those writing or fabricating a story about a combat action, for me, inevitably brought back memories of actual combat and forced me to try to render those things as accurately as possible, which is why I killed off a couple of guys that my dad wasn't expecting to fucking die, because rule number one in combat is the enemy gets a vote, right? and
Wow.
and he will punish tactical nastiness. So, uh, you know, if a character isn't doing something that he probably ought to under those circumstances, um, those that does not go unrewarded.
Yeah.
One of our biggest concerns when I invited Trent to co-author with me to draw upon his combat experience and knowledge of small unit tactics, particularly in the Marine Corps. One of our biggest concerns was whether this would have a bad effect and cause some recurrence of stress, PTSD, that obviously he had encountered and managed to handle fairly well to our knowledge. But his mother was very concerned that it was the wrong thing to ask him to do. Yeah, help with the covers and
Yeah.
other material and review what I've written, provide some brief input, but actually write when it's going to cause him to fall back on and depend upon his experience. But we think he came through with flying colors, and yes, it enhanced the level of description, the thoughts and emotions of the characters,
Yeah.
as well as changing some of the faux pas that I had made in setting up the defense of this medical facility. That was the focus of the attack.
I want to ask Trent about. So, for those that don't know, Trent was the commander, and his Marine, Corporal Dunham, jumped on a hand grenade and sacrificed himself to save Marines. And obviously, that's a traumatic experience. That's what the documentary is about. And it's called The Gift. And it's about the gift that Corporal Dunham, at least how I take this, how Corporal Dunham had given a gift to the Marines around him as he ultimately sacrificed himself and is awarded the Medal of Honor for that. So when Arch talks about the worries about these things, it's a significant thing. I mean, as someone who's seen a lot of combat time himself, it's easy to bring up memories and things that you'd stored away, don't even remember. All of a sudden, they're crystal clear because your brain is on not just record; it's on HD record. And so I remember like being in a firefight and looking down, and I can see every rock on the ground below me, every single rock, and just in high contrast, and I can see it. And if I spend too much time in that space, I have to pay a price for that. It's okay, I can handle it, but not everybody can. Not everybody gets the help that I've had. So there is a cost for that, Trenton. And how much do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? And do you understand that it's going to be a cost before you start that process, or does it cost you anything at all? Maybe I'm assuming something.
It's a relevant question, Pete, and I don't know if I have a very good answer for you aside from my own experience, which is that we're all wired differently, and we all handle traumatic situations differently. So, for me, getting into the writing, it was emotional, um, but at the same time, it was also therapeutic because it forced me to deal with those emotions and to deal with those memories and not just pretend that they weren't there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the most important thing in uh, in anyone who is experiencing post-traumatic stress is simply acknowledging the things that they experienced and acknowledging them in the proper context.
Mm.
I don't think personally that it's a disorder. I think it's a natural product of exposing a human being to unnatural circumstances. And we all deal with those types of things differently because we're all physiologically different to one degree or another. Some of us are wired to be more resilient under those circumstances, and some experiences that we go through in life make us more resilient to those things. So to me, the writing, it was therapeutic. It was actually a positive experience, and once I got into it, I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad we covered the PTS or PTSD, as I call it. I do think it's a disorder, and I know for me, my body reacts differently to things now because of that. And I work to recharge it. So, however we all approach that thing, if you are in any way suffering, you damn well go to the VA, go reach out to your friends, get help. And if you're worried about your friend, you're the first responder. So go grab your friend and spend time with them. Don't wait until, look, I always say this, and this will always be true. If someone's in trouble and they're at the end of their rope, they cannot reach out any longer. They're hanging on with both hands for dear life, and they're not sure, and they're ready to let go. So let's get ahead of it, get in front of it, get people working together, build community, build fellowship, save the brave, savethebrave.org. That's the charity that we do. I lost my brother in October to suicide. He's a veteran. And, you know, it's hard because when my brother was struggling with all this stuff, and this is not going to be about my brother, but I would talk to him, and he's like, I don't want it. I don't want this to be like the only thing we ever talk about. And I don't want everybody to look at me differently. I'm going to fight this thing. I'm going to get through it. And we got to believe in that. But when you call him or you text him or you check in with him, you say, hey, how things going? Not good. And you need to be ready for that next response. When he says not good, what are you going to do? You're going to get in the car and drive 6 hours to go see your brother on a weeknight when everybody's got stuff to do? What are you going to do? So that's just the PTSD thing. Since we brought it up, I wanted to cover that. I want to get back to the gods of war and what they allow, Trent and Arch. When you I think about Will Cushing, a guy we talked about the other day on the show. He's a Civil War era Navy guy who almost graduated from Annapolis, right? On the eve of graduation, he gets kicked out of the school and never graduates, but he's buried with honors at Annapolis because when push and shove came together, he was audacious and he would go out and do the action, and he would shock the hell out of everybody else because he shouldn't be there, right? And so he wasn't specifically trained to be this he wasn't a Marine. He was a Navy guy. He was going to pilot a ship, but he was courageous and audacious. And because he forced the action, the gods of war abided his survival and success because he compelled things without being, a high caliber, like he was a special forces guy, but there was no school to teach him to do that. So when you think about the randomness of combat, Trent, it doesn't make any damn sense sometimes. You're like, how did this happen? We had a dog steal a fish that was being barbecued during a firefight. And so we're all laughing as the dog is stealing the fish and running the firefight. Meanwhile, there's a firefight going on. None of that is supposed to happen. Gods of War also have a sense of humor.
Indeed. We were fortunate, Tag, at the front end, while I was still doing research on PTSD in particular, because that's what the book is about. The incidents and the treatment of PTSD. Tag provided me a list of Marines that he knew from his experience were suffering or had suffered from PTSD. And they provide, all of them provided input to the same questions. All answered that they were not prepared by anything in their training for PTSD. All replied with some dissatisfaction about how well the VA was handling PTSD. A number of them really came down hard on what can be called over medication, turning you into a zombie. And you may have experienced that, maybe not, if you went through the VA. But I had the opportunity to visit with, because one of my brothers was enrolled in a PTSD therapy program at Fort Harrison in Montana. As a matter of fact, he went through it twice. And that's a Vietnam era vet, Navy. And it did him more good than anything else that he'd been through, including AA. If everyone had the same experience with that, or was able to go through some form of therapy work, things might turn out a little bit better. But unfortunately, some of this gets pushed back. The vet doesn't get the attention that he needs, or declines to go through the program, or just makes a fatal decision to bow out of it before anybody can get to him. TAG still deals with vets who have that problem, and we still lose vets way more than we should. We were losing vets at the time we wrote the book, and the hope was that it would bring more attention to the need for continued treatment and dealing with it, other than inviting their former enemies to visit them on the domestic stage and attack them there. Anyway, I'll yield the floor to TAG.
Well, Pete, I'm not sure how much further we want to go with this, because I mean, we can talk about this all day.
We could.
But I think that the most important thing, and something that comes out in Blue Sky Medicine, the book that we wrote together with PTSD as a backdrop, is that the best treatment in my experience is the camaraderie and fellowship of those who have shared those experiences with you.
Right.
Medication can help, but it's not a panacea. And the only thing that can truly act as therapy is the fellowship of those who shared that experience with you, or a similar experience, because the person has to be able to meet you on common ground in order to understand what you're talking about or what you went through. And therapists, as good as they are, may not have that base of experience that facilitates that.
All right.
So there's a fabulous book by Sebastian Junger called Tribe, that is a fabulous synopsis of post-traumatic stress and ways to mitigate it, that, coincidentally are founded in tribal community, tribal society. So Native Americans, warfare was a way of life for them, and their tribes were structured in a way that allowed the warrior to deal with the things they experienced on the battlefield, instead of making it something outside of the norm. It was normalized and understood by all and dealt with by all as a community, as a tribe. And that's something that simply is not a facet of our society due to its construct.
We get the link for our episode with Sebastian Junger talking about tribe below on the screen. You can just go to the Break It Down show and type in Sebastian Junger. There's 2 episodes. One when he talks about freedom, his latest book, and then one about tribe. It's all awesome. I want to go back to the Gods of War, Trent, and I want to see how you and Arch dealt with that. And like I said, the Gods of War have a hilarious sense of humor sometimes. Sometimes they are brutal. And like I said, the enemy gets a vote, but so do the gods of war. Where you're like, I do not understand how and why this happened, but it sure as hell did. Doesn't matter how good you are at combat, the worst guy out there can absolutely be the guy that does the defining action. That's just you lose all control of humanity and reality once you get into a firefight. You can win most of them by being highly trained, and a Marine unit certainly is that, but you still can't suck out that extra little bit of chaos that is in all combat situations. So when you're writing and helping your dad write, how do you account for that? Because the gods, they get their say, and they often take a bigger bite than we anticipate.
Yeah, that's a great question, Pete. And that was something that I think my dad experienced right off the bat when I killed off a couple of his main characters.
Yeah.
That there's you can fucking script an operation all you want, but once that first round goes down range, then all bets are off, and
Yeah.
everything past that point is improvisation.
Yeah.
So that was part of what I was talking about earlier in trying to bring a sense of realism to the book. Was I find myself going along in edit mode, reading what my dad had created, which is impressive because I simply don't, I'm not a left brain kind of guy, so I'm not that creative, but working with my dad in his books has really been a benefit for me as a son, because I've got to gain an insight into my dad's creativity that I simply didn't have visibility on before. So I'd see where he was going with a certain chapter, right? Say the opening contact. And I understood where the rest of the story progressed and how he had laid out the storyline. But I was actually quite ruthless in in throwing in friction, whether it was induced by the enemy or induced by the gods of war, onto both sides, both enemy and friendly sides, in order to impart a sense of realism as best I understood it through my experiences, as if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
A lot of realism there. That surprised the hell out of me. Really did.
Is it helpful to you though, Arch, to have all that chaos thrown into your book and all that friction? Because listen, friction, it's a concept us combat guys get, like, hey, we have to hurry up, get in the vehicles and go. And literally you go to your hooch where you live, you pull on the door handle and the door handle comes off in your hand. You're like, now I have to spend 2 hours trying to get my damn door open.
Right.
So let me go borrow somebody else's kit, which is not my kit, because I got to still get out. It's like, we hadn't even got to the hard part yet. We're just getting to the leaving, and you can't even leave because,
Well, a lot of friction, conflict, if you will, is naturally built into narratives in order to build suspense, horror, and the thrill, i.e., thriller novels. So it's already there to some extent. But when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, the best war novels, I think, are those that do go into detail to explain how horrible war is and how crazy and chaotic it is on the human psyche. I've spent a little time the last couple of weeks catching up on some of the good World War I movies that have come out in the last 10 years. And I think I mentioned one of them to Trent the other day. The Great War, the Lost Battalion, which deals not only with World War One, but a black group of fighters who are unfortunately isolated and did not get the orders to withdraw due to the problems of the communications being cut. But there is some excellent work that has come out of Hollywood, England, and France, and Germany in the past few years. And it tends to dwell much more on the individual problems and stresses, such as with trench warfare and going over the top, and the stress that that engenders among soldiers who are not prone to admit fear. Although I will say, if you weren't afraid, you're lying through your teeth.
Yeah. So there's a lot of truth to that.
When you come even close to war, you get the feeling very easily when you start hearing helicopters in the air, and you hear the sounds of war. I was in Baghdad, Iraq, for a very short period of time, about a month, about the time that Trent was coming into Iraq for his second deployment. And things were still going on, although the major fighting was over with. And you had a lot of Moj that were trying to make inroads in Baghdad, and were making some inroads, but they were countered by the local residents who would step outside, and these people just wanted the damn war to be over with. And so they'd step outside at night as a warning. They'd rip off 2 or 3 rounds from their AK, and they all had weapons of some kind. And they just wanted it to be over because their lives had been shattered.
Yeah.
Had lost family, and they were anxious for it to come to an end. So that brought a new reality to me, although I was never involved in any combat other than an occasional fist fight when I was a kid.
Yeah. But you're getting the sense of like the Iraqis, right? You know, like, hey, we don't care if we win or lose as a nation. I just want to stop losing everything. And so right here where we're at, if we could just stop fighting, you know, and that same thing in Yugoslavia when I was in Bosnia, the folks there were just tired of seeing their villages and hamlets ripped apart and people murdered. They were just sick of it and didn't want to lose anyone from their family. They didn't want to, you know, it was awful. And I think that parallels nicely to the Native American communities because they've known nothing but chaos for a very, very long time. And it's one thing I don't get is this movement to erase Native Americans from, you know, things, teams and butter and everything else. It seems like we should find a way to honor these folks and keep them as part of the general culture. But I guess we're in our own perverse way canceling Native Americans in terms of day-to-day, you know, presence in our society. And I love that you're writing about that. But what are your thoughts on Native American? I mean, I'm a fan of the people, and I always want to understand their struggle and embrace their history and culture. But maybe I'm weird with that.
Well, warfare has always been part of the culture of most Native Americans. Some much more so than others. They fought among themselves. For what? Territory, brides. One of the reasons the Comanche managed to survive as long as they did as a nomadic, warlike tribe was because they believed in capturing the next brides for the tribe,
Yeah.
and young people, such as Cynthia Parker, she was a young white girl who was captured by Peta Nakona of the Quahati band of Comanche, and it became Quanah Parker's mother. Quanah Parker being the last great leader of the Comanche. He was never a chief in a sense that others are designated by their tribe as their chief, but he did everything by way of protecting and providing for the Quahati band, in addition to threatening American development of the Southwest for a quarter of a century. That's a long time when the press of humanity and the westward expansion was at its highest point. And that was in the middle and latter part of the 19th century.
Yeah.
But war was not uncommon. The term blue sky medicine is a term that comes from the Comanche tribe. The surviving members of the Comanche became very good at dealing with each other's problems and treating each other. The favorite method, because it was so effective, was sweat lodge therapy. And this is common throughout Native America, as well as the Plains tribes, maybe more so with the Plains. But there was a particular Comanche gentleman who, in the middle of the 20th century, named his treatment that involved lots of sweat lodge activity blue sky medicine. That's what he called it. And that's where I picked up on that. I did enough research about what to call sweat lodge and exposure to the natural elements, the blue skies, the green pastures, the peace, the love. Anyway, that's what he called it. That's where the title of the book comes from. So back to the main question, virtually all of the tribes have systems of support. One of the favorite systems of support are what the Comanche call the Little Ponies. And this is an organization that to this day, it honors each veteran who returns from a simple assignment, whether it's wartime, peacetime, or whatever. When he comes back home to Southwest Oklahoma, then an honoring powwow is held by the Little Ponies. And usually the public is invited, and there will be a lot of gifting, a lot of thank you dances, and a whole lot of food. And I suppose in some places, a whole lot of beer and alcohol being consumed in the spirit of the moment. But they have internal support mechanisms, and when those fail, sometimes their vets are reluctant to go elsewhere for help, and that can become a very difficult situation. So I was raised in an area of the country called Indian country today, southern Kansas. I worked for years in Oklahoma with Native Americans, and had a lot of Native American friends. That's where a lot of my information about their way of life and so forth comes from.
When you think about when you
anyway,
write
that's
about
it.
the Native American way of life, are you hearkening back to an older time? Are you more set in real time? I mean, there's a lot of struggle on reservations with with addiction and with these other things. or do you kind of blend because we don't want to just have like, you know, stereotypical characters too, right? You've got to enrich them. So how much of that richness do you bring in?
Well, I try to bring as much as possible. And there is more and more problems with drugs, crime.
Yeah.
And in the last 10 to 15 years, child theft and child trafficking. My second book focuses on child trafficking, not of an Indian child, but of a white child. And it just so happens that members of the Kota clan discover her, and the process of bringing her around and how she responds to their kind of blue sky training and horsemanship and speaking to letting nature, Mother Earth speak to you rather than walking across the face of the earth without ever acknowledging it. Those kinds of things that come directly from teachings, discussions that I was party to with my Comanche, Kiowa, and some Cheyenne friends as well. Focused on the great massacre of horses that resulted in the defeat of the Comanche and the Kiowa at the Battle of Palo Duro in 1874. So warfare, nothing new. And how they deal with it in modern times is something that I like to deal with. My two main characters outside of Bear Kota, who is the main character, are Grandfather Kota and Uncle Willie Kota. They are twins, brothers, born the same year I was born, literally.
Yeah.
And one has developed into quite a keeper of the old ways. He is a tribal elder in every sense of the word. He learned from people who were tribal elders when I was there. People like George Watchetaker. Woodgie Watchetaker was one of the most favorite speakers and dancers, native dancers in the tribe and among the tribes. When I was a reporter in Lawton, Oklahoma, and I met Woodgie, a great guy, and he never met anybody that he didn't like. Was an interesting way of putting it, but that was true, and that's why he had so many good friends. He was even entertained by the Queen of England at one time. He was so popular. His notoriety was that he could make it rain. And he had great success at that. Although he always told me when I asked him, "How do you do that?" He said, I show up at the right time. And that explains that he's quite a humble person, or was. And unfortunately, he passed on in about 86, I guess it was. And the entire state mourned his passing because he had become such a great representative of the tribe and traditional way of life. Grandfathers, aunts, and uncles are always key in passing on the culture. And I try to reflect that in my books.
I want to make sure people go and check out Arch Gibson's website, or let's start first with Amazon and his author page. Just type in Arch Gibson, you'll find it. And then the other thing you can do is go to his website with all of his writing, modernwestfiction.com.
Right.
It's neat to be able to talk about these things. It's neat to have guys like you and Craig telling very unique stories in terms of these are truly American stories, where as we try to mix these worlds together, you know, and get past the fantasy of what Native Americans are. We seem to have this belief as a nation that Native Americans live in peace and harmony with their surroundings and each other, but it's just not true. It's hard to survive. It's hard to survive when you don't have enough stuff. And the more that we understand some of the reality of these stories, and you work with your friends that you know, I think that that gives us all an important lesson. Let's I want to give Trent a chance to say what he wants to say here before the end, and definitely help your dad out and sell the books. But what are your thoughts, Trent, in terms of where your dad's going now, and what can we do to support him besides just going to the website or the Amazon page?
Well, I think the most important thing, at least that for my dad, if I understand correctly, and if he doesn't mind me speaking for him, I think the thing that he enjoys the most is the interaction with readers, engaging on topics that he deals with in his novels. So his blog page on his website is pretty important to him, and it's something that he's trying to engage on more frequently, which all depends on his level of writing, you know, how busy he is in every day working on his current projects. But getting in touch with his readers and interacting with them to get background on his stories, where they come from, and where he's going with them, I think, to me, seems to be the most gratifying thing for him. And it's certainly been the most educational aspect of this for me, is understanding where his creativity comes from, where his characters and his storylines have originated. And it's fascinating to me how he's able to keep them all straight in his head and evolve them from book to book.
Yeah.
You know, when we were working on, say, Blue Sky Medicine, he was already thinking 2 books downrange about Wasape. It's fascinating to me to have had insight on a writer's mind, how it works, and how the depth of the creativity. So I think that the best thing for him is just to reach out via his blog page and interact with him about his storylines and his characters.
Cool.
And I do enjoy that,
Yeah.
visiting with readers or would-be readers and talking about the subject matter of the book and what the book's about. And everybody wants to know the first question: what's the name of your book? Well, what's it about? And fortunately, I haven't lacked for words to describe and respond to those kinds of questions, and I enjoy it because, as every writer will tell you, the characters speak to you sooner or later.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you listen to them, then you'll have more than enough material to write about for a very long time. If you listen to other people, people are the sources of my characters. And if you read the newspaper or watch TV news, you can't help but see and experience some of the problems that people of minorities in particular have now had years ago. I enjoy, particularly on the last book, Wasape, blending the character of the great-grandfather with history as it unfolded in the American West from 1860 until he died in 1952. So I just try to keep my ears open and listen. I always enjoyed listening to my elders, Father grandfather and all of them talk about the old days, the good old days. And this was in Indian country, is Indian country. So that's another chapter for another time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys coming on the show. Let me wrap this up. Stand by. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly,